Hello and welcome to Tromsø Twilight, the channel where I, Vincent, talk to you about books, movies, music that I find interesting, that I enjoy, or a combination of the two. And today I would like to talk to you about The Years by Annie Ernaux. This book I received recently as a gift, and I read it and I thought that it would be interesting to just share some thoughts about it. As ever, I haven't read any reviews of it, so I don't know if everything I'm saying has already been said, but this is just my perspective reading the book. Annie Ernaux, as I understand it, got the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2022. This book is from 2007, and it's an account of the time from which Ernaux was born in the 40s up until the year before the book came out in 2006. All of her books, as I understand it, are autobiographical in one way or another. But what I found interesting about this book and why I wanted to talk about it is because it's the first autobiographical book I've read that treats the subject in the way that Ernaux does, where she writes from like a first-person plural perspective. John Jeremiah Sullivan did this in an article some years back about the Tea Party, where he described participating in Tea Party demonstrations and wrote from the we point of view as if he was a member of the Tea Party, which he was not. I've also read some novels written in the we form. The one that comes to mind immediately is The Virgin Suicides. But this book is different from all of that. It's like the perspective of the particular subset, the particular demographic of France that Annie Ernaux belongs to. She describes her teenage years where like old France is kind of moving into the influence of the 60s. Patriarchy is kind of beginning to be challenged. She's describing the events in Algeria in the background, the older people around her talking about the war. But again, she's not talking about I and or writing from directly from her own perspective. She's talking about we, that we experienced this and the old people around us talked about the war. So she's kind of describing this collective experience. And what I found kind of fascinating about the book is that it's even possible to describe the experience of a generation in the way that Ernaux does, or at least her part of her generation. As the book goes on, I kind of realised that she's stretching this we. Like she describes how in the 90s the French identity is kind of created against the immigrant identity in France. Like she says, we didn't consider people from North Africa to be French. I don't know that Annie Ernaux feels that way. You get the sense that it's like she's describing how, regardless of your own individual beliefs and convictions, you still exist within a cultural stream. And you could say the same thing about today, that as the world drifts more and more into a fragmented right-wing perspective, you and I may not agree with it, but we still kind of get swept along in the stream of it. It really struck me how significant this is when I got to the section about the 90s and how she described, the consumerist, apolitical world of the 1990s, which is my teenage years. That's when I grew up, and describes the shopping centres and how even people who believed they were anti-consumerist still went to those places and bought a new pair of boots. I feel like she's describing the world that I grew up in. Despite the fact that this book is so French and I grew up in the United Kingdom, I could recognise the cultural environment that she was describing. So this is a book that really made me think about how much of culture and the way that we think and our assumptions about the world are shaped outside of us by a kind of amorphous cultural shift or zeitgeist, and how little we maybe create the world that we live in, intellectually, culturally, and in terms of the things that we consume, remember, discuss, and believe. The other major conceit of the book is that she writes in the third person about she, and this is where she tells her own more idiosyncratic, subjective story. She describes photographs of herself from the 40s and up until the time that she's writing, and weaves these into the text. So throughout this text about the we of the French left-wing literati, there is the story of a woman who rises from the French working class, becomes educated, marries, has children, and then as society makes it more acceptable to divorce, does so, takes younger lovers, works as a teacher up into her 60s, and then in her 60s decides to finally write the books that she's always wanted to write. And when I realised that Ernaux had not started writing seriously until her 60s, I was blown away, because to create such an unusual and impressive narrative style, and to write with this arc of a whole life, but not a life lived, like the world and how it developed throughout the span of your life. What an incredible thing to do for a person who had maybe only been writing as a hobby up until that point. The last thing I'll say is that this book is also about the weird, overwhelming fact of living and having lived and aging. She talks about, being in her 60s and how she feels like she's a peer with people in their 40s, but people in their 40s see her more like they see people in their 80s. They see her as old, while she feels middle-aged. And she bookends the book with all these images which are partly taken from mass culture, from films, from news, from things that we've all seen, and partly just moments from a life that she remembers, images, the particular scrapbook within the memory of an individual, which opens the book and closes the book. And the first words of the book is, all these images will disappear. So it's like she's trying to get her life down on the page before she dies, and it's extinguished. In that respect, she is tackling subjectivity, like the completely unique subjectivity of a life, which only happens once in the glint of an eye and it's gone. But on the other hand, within the frame of this kind of mass experience, mass consciousness, mass culture that is moving around us all the time. Those are my thoughts about The Years by Annie Ernaux. Have you read it, or have you read any of her other books? I would love to hear from you if you have. I would be really interested to hear what you think. I'm going to be coming back pretty soon with a list of 10 books that I found disturbing. So if you're interested in that, please subscribe or look out for the video. It would also help me a great deal if you would like this video, if you enjoyed it. Nobody sees my videos yet. I don't want too many people to see them, but I would like some people to see them. Okay, thanks for your time. Take care.